Customers that came through the online journey were more likely to be underinsured, and therefore if they had a claim, they potentially wouldn't have the right level of cover. So what do? We did the opposite. We basically invested heavily in the offline capabilities. We built out the contact center, and the business grew strength to strength. It fairly recently sold for I think it was about $800 million was the last transaction that business went for. But it was a classic example of, as a finance director, you would read the P&L, you would look at the cost codes and go, yeah, we're just going to cut that out and everything's going to be fine.
Before we start today's episode, I want to address a common challenge I have observed with FP&A professionals. While Excel skills are abundant, many are not fully tapping into Power BI's capabilities to enhance their financial analysis skills. With over a decade of experience in FP&A consulting and countless training sessions conducted, my most loved training by FP&A professionals, hands down, has been my Introduction to Power BI for Financial Analysts. So, for my loyal podcast listeners, I am giving you free access to it today. Check out the link in the description below to upgrade your FP&A skills today. Thank you. Hi everybody, I'd like to invite Kevin Fleming. I'd like to thank you, Kevin, for your time today, for attending our podcast. For the listeners, Kevin is the CFO at Elder from last almost 6 years now, 1 month short of 6 years. So 6 years doing some great things there. We'll be learning about Kevin's journey and his take on FP&A and how FP&A helps basically the business and the finance community. So thank you, Kevin, for attending FP&A Unboxed.
Thank you for the invite. I mean, I'm a big fan of FP&A and how FP&A can make such a big difference strategically to a business. So always excited to talk about this kind of thing.
Perfect. No, it's perfect, right? I mean, before this conversation as well, some of the things that you're about to talk about, I am also very excited to hear, because I think I will have some learning out of it as well. So looking forward to this episode for sure. So before we go to the very exciting part, right, Kevin, tell us a bit more about your career journey. You started as an auditor and an accountant, and auditing. Oh my God, I want to know more about that one. So from auditing and accounting to becoming a CFO who has a track record in delivering business and debt restructuring, right? So basically fixing businesses and debt. Love to learn a bit more about it. How did you come from, accounting, auditing to CFO?
Sure. Yes. I mean, I did start in audit, but I have to say audit was never really what I wanted to end up in. For me, I never liked the idea of all you're doing is reporting on a business. I actually wanted to influence, drive, help a business be successful. So I did my auditing background, in the northwest of Ireland. That was often your only route into finance. But as soon as I qualified, I went straight into a number of small companies, and I deliberately targeted those small companies, because what you are is you're the number one in finance. So you're having to see kind of the whole vertical element of finance in a business. You're having to do the basics from the payroll to also help the owners and actually think about how they're going to grow. I mix that with a number of manufacturing type roles to understand how operations and finance interact. Some really interesting ones were as a cost and management accountant back in the days when videotape was the thing, like understanding kind of those processes and the financial consequences and decisions at each of the stage and how you optimize profitability. And also through the periods, I've done some contracting roles, primarily around transformation. Again, for me, it's getting my hands dirty. It's really getting into the business and making it work. So done some contracting roles with turnarounds, but also some buy and builds, which were really, really interesting. And all that's led to, Elder, 6 years nearly at Elder, which is I tell people Elder is a very simple, complicated business. When you look at it at a high level, it's very simple. We're really pushing living care as an alternative to the care home. We're cutting new paths in that regard. But when you get down to the next level, we are a double-sided marketplace where we're always trying to balance supply and demand. We're always trying to make sure that we have the right number of carers in the right location with the right skills with the customers that are looking for these carers. So it's definitely been fun. I think of all the businesses that I've been in, it's probably one where FP&A has had the biggest impact. My strategy, my thinking around finance is not a back office function. Finance is the radar and the rudder of the ship. And it's a very cheesy analogy, but it's very, very relevant. For me, finance as a radar is always assessing what's around, what we're seeing, what's coming towards us. And then as a rudder is really steering the ship in the right direction, making the most of the opportunities that we see. And we've done that really, really successfully at Elder. We steered the ship through COVID, as an example, which was quite exciting. So yeah, for me, it's been quite the journey. I've always worked to get experience that is interesting. I've always looked at those roles and opportunities where I can really drive change in the business. But I only ever look to work in businesses where they genuinely see the importance of finance and finance being that strategic partner to the CEO.
Sure. So when you say, that the sail and the rudder to the business, I'd like to understand a little bit more around that. So how, like, could you share an example or a story where the business has finance has actually helped make a business decision and either moved the business away from a risk or towards a growth, maybe more positively, right?
Yes.
Because I think stories is something our listeners always like to hear a bit more about and can relate a little bit more to.
Sure. I think for me, it goes back a number of years. I was working for a business that was considering itself primarily as an online business. And I remember having conversations with the owners, and you read the P&L and you look at the costs in the P&L, and the business is proclaiming itself as a website business, but actually there was a huge amount of costs in that business around the offline element of it, so the support center. So if we looked at things like the headcount costs, roughly about 2/3 of those costs were in the support center. So anybody looking at that P&L would go, why are we doing this? We're an online business. We can drive massive profitability if we literally just take that cost out. But actually, and this is where FP&A makes a big difference, when you overlay the operational data and you understand what's happening in the business and you translate that into what you see in the P&L, we got a very, very different story. We were very lucky in the sense we just completed a really, really brilliant piece of work where we'd implemented Power BI, where literally we could track the customer journey pretty much from campaign, as in where we got the customer in the first place, all the way through to retention. So it was effectively an insurance type model. And actually, when you got into it, and I think we were pretty far gone on the idea of no, we're going 100% online because this is where we're going to drive fantastic margin. But actually, when you got into it and you differentiated the customer journey between somebody who went through the online journey and somebody who went through what we were calling the offline journey, what we were seeing straight away was, well, hang on a minute. The customer that comes through the offline journey is actually spending about 15 to 20% more per transaction. Interesting. Secondly, that customer in relation to ancillary services is taking about twice as many ancillary services as the customer coming through the online journey. Third, the renewal rate of that customer is about 25% higher than the customer that comes through the online journey. And then the last piece was, because it was an insurance product, what we were seeing was the customers that came through the online journey were more likely to be underinsured. And therefore, if they had a claim, they potentially wouldn't have the right level of cover. So what do? We did the opposite. We basically invested heavily in the offline capabilities. We built out the contact center, and the business grew strength to strength. It fairly recently sold for I think it was about $800 million was the last transaction that business went for. But it was a classic example of, as a finance director, you would read the P&L, you would look at the cost codes and go, yeah, we're just going to cut that out and everything's going to be fine. But actually you overlay the operational data with what's actually happening, and we just got a fundamentally different view of the world.
I love this story.
It's probably my favorite one. We all kind of think of the career journey where, often you'll start as an accountant, a financial controller, an FD, and a CFO. But for me, if you want to think about that transition from FD to CFO, for me, that was my light bulb moment. And the great thing was, we had the data, we had the proof that we could basically come up and say to everybody in the business, look, I know we said this is what we're going to do, but actually look at what we found. And we tested it out, and it was a data-led decision that we kind of prodded a little bit harder, but fundamentally straight away then realized, no, absolutely, we've got to pivot. We've got to go this direction. So that's probably my favorite one.
So data-driven strategic decision making. Oh my God, that's a textbook business case. I think that is a textbook business case in FP&A, man. If that
Oh,
doesn't justify the
100%.
case for the FP&A, I don't know what does. But again, see, that's an interesting story you raise, right, Kevin? Because I think when you started the story, yes, all of the points are there, but it was Power BI and your organized data, which I guess helped FP&A produce that result in an
Yes.
efficient manner. If
Yes.
FP&A was stuck between 200 Excel books and trying to, get data through 200 Excel books, then it is a nightmare. It is.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's impossible, but it'll
Yeah.
probably take longer, more resources, and the answer might not be as accurate.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, what I see at Elder, we have a similar data structure where we don't necessarily have the full view from end to end. But what we are always conscious of is, the cost of bringing a customer and a carer through the funnel, how well they convert. And for us, we really focus on, lifetime value. How much profit do we see generated per customer over their lifetime, and the cost of getting those customers through the funnel. But even though it's a very complicated setup, what we always make sure within Elder in particular is that the model is simple. It's not something where it takes 2 weeks to run a scenario through. Like I think with Elder, it's disproportionately complicated as a business purely because you are dealing with two sides of supply and demand. You're looking at kind of those sides of things fluctuating, but you're also working in an environment where you're often exposed to macro elements. I mean, COVID was one example. The supply crunch that came on the back of COVID was another example. Like if Google all of a sudden changes their algorithms, you can see your distribution channels change quite materially, quite quickly. So for us, what we've done is we've set up FP&A to be able to be very agile and basically be able to move really, really quickly and support those decisions that we need to make like in relatively short order. So we've got a very strong operating rhythm where what we have is, and we always think of it as a hierarchy. We always start with we're always focused on the business strategy, but then how do we break that strategy down into its components? So it's breaking the strategy down into those North Star metrics. We try and make sure that all the directors of the business are really, really clear on what they are and how they influence them. But what we do is every week we have what we call a business performance session where we're literally looking at all those North Stars on the customer and the care side, what's happening at the top of the funnel, the bottom of the funnel, what's happening with retention. And very quickly, if we see anything, we're able in very, very short order to say, this is good, we need to do more of this. This is not good, and therefore we need to do A, B, and C. Or we're thinking about doing this, what's the cost implication of that? What does it mean for CAC? What does it mean for expected retention? And it's the ability to move really quickly, which is also very important. But we have it all lined up that it all aligns with the strategy. We have our financial model, which is, structured for when we want to seek external investment or deal with external parties. That's what we use every day of the week. We're constantly updating and refreshing that.
Yeah, but that's what you're saying, right? So your financial model also with each department, what it sounds like, they know exactly what their North Star. Now you say North Star, I say KPI or drivers. It basically they know exactly what levers do they control and are they controlling them correctly and are they driving the ship in the right direction or are they going haywire as compared to everybody else. So it's not only about what is right for that department, but is it right for that department in context with other departments in the business. Otherwise, all over the place, right?
Yeah, that's probably our biggest challenge. Like if you take a business like ours, we're effectively, if I break it down into kind of three core components, we've got a team and they have to drive leads into the sales team, and the sales team have to convert those leads, and the service team have to retain those customers. Now, what you want is you want each of the teams to be very clear in relation to their objectives, what they have to do and how they have to do them. But you need to make sure that there's alignment there. And I think, the best example you can have is, as a marketing person, you need 1,000 leads. You can get 800 leads of rubbish, but tick, I've got 1,000 leads. From a salesperson, I need to deliver 1,000 customers. Well, they could deliver 800 customers, which only stay for a week, which is rubbish. But from their point, it's a tick. So what we always have to do is we have to have a combination of individual metrics for each of the teams, but something that sits across all of them to make sure that it's correct.
Yeah.
So for us, how we do it is like we'll always start, like it always starts with the business strategy. What we then do is we then simplify that business strategy into what we call a business equation. So for us, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get the most amount of leads through that convert well and retain for a long period of time. It's kind of that simple. We then break that down into each of the teams and what they need to focus on. So from a marketing perspective, your individual targets around volume and the cost of bringing that volume through. From a sales perspective, it's around your conversion rate. So it's not
that volume.
It's around your conversion rate on that volume and the cost of that conversion rate. And then from a retention point of view, it's around the lifetime value and the cost of that lifetime value. But what we do is we make sure that there's an overarching view of the world. So what we tend to do is we tend to use a couple of metrics to keep us honest. I'd say the two call-outs I'd have is, one, we'll often talk about net movement. So rather than these are new customers and these are lost customers, what you can end up having is you can inflate your new customers by bringing through customers that are never going to stay. And you end up spending a sales CAC and getting them over the line and spending a retention CAC on retaining them for a couple of weeks. So we tend to look at net, but we also look at cohorts and the performance of those cohorts in relation to the cost of bringing those customers in, getting them over the line, and actually the profitability those cohorts are generating. So if we look at the FP&A operating rhythm, as well as those weekly sessions, at the end of every month, we will sit with all these leaders. We'll sit with them individually and we'll talk about how they've performed, what's worked well, what's not gone well, how they've gone against plan. But then we'll also educate the group on aggregate level, how we're doing. If we look at it on the basis of how many customers we're bringing in, what's the overall cost of that customer, and actually how are they performing in relation to retention? Because for us, it's all around lifetime value. That's what drives the profitability for our business.
Yeah, because profitability only starts once you recoup your CAC of acquisition and of basically of retaining them. So actually, you will only make real money if the customer is with you for a longer period in time rather than leaves you in 2 or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, because then it is probably a loss-making venture rather than a profit-making venture.
And for us, like what we took, for example, our marketing leads and our sales leads around, if you're spending that amount of money per customer, this is how long they're going to have to stay. And it brings it home, particularly when you see, well, actually that length of time is 20% longer than it was 6 months ago. So how does that make sense? But it's really about making sure, because I think the challenge you have with those three kind of silos almost, and they can be silos because they've got slightly different objectives, is you can end up driving the wrong behaviors. But the good thing is, if you educate, for example, the marketing team on the importance of payback and how payback is impacted by retention, and retention is impacted by the quality of sales that go through in the first place, then you're almost kind of training them to be much more aware of what they're bringing over. It's not just around volume, it's around quality. We talk about retention in the business, customer retention in the business technically sits in the service team, but we all own retention. If sales don't have a good experience with a customer or push a customer live that maybe didn't quite want the service, that's their responsibility. If marketing are targeting the wrong category of customer that isn't going to stay, that's also their responsibility.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's really interesting, and it's definitely, it takes a lot of coordination between finance and each of these teams, and a lot of interactions and a lot of visibility as to what's going on, just to kind of drive those behaviors.
Yeah, but see, what you're saying, all of that is essentially, it takes a lot of business partnering to drive the right behavior, and which is completely correct. But the reality is that is only possible because you've got an FP&A infrastructure in place which enables your finance team to go and do the business partnering. If they were spending more than half their time basically jostling with data and cleaning the data, then they don't have the time to go and do that business partnering, do they really?
No, 100%. Yeah.
So reality is that you deserve credit as much as a leader to, because you've now provided them that FP&A infrastructure within which now they can flourish, which they clearly are flourishing, which is the point, right? So I think that's a fantastic story. One that just really, you actually covered our next point as well, right? Well, that takes you from chaos to clarity of how do you really provide clarity to the business. You provide clarity by actually doing this, which is fantastic, right? So, what role does storytelling play in helping your leaders make better decisions? Because, okay, you do all of this, but to really convince them to change their behavior and think beyond their siloed environment, and you need to have good storytelling ability. So, how do you think storytelling helps, and what is the importance of it?
Massively. I think, it's often when you think about finance in the business and how it engages with the business, it almost feels like you're at risk of talking different languages, to be quite honest. I think, like, a good example, I'll go back to the example of, I was saying earlier around the decision between online and offline. That's because initially we were talking two different languages in relation to what was actually happening in the business and what we were just seeing within the P&L. So for me, it's just so important we engage with people in the right way, and we always have to be conscious of how we interact with non-financial stakeholders. I've had a couple of eureka moments where, going back to the idea of the business equation, it's really interesting to think about, we automatically assume they know everything in the P&L, which we shouldn't do. So kind of sitting down and talking their language and making it very simple, I think is really important. So, like, a good example, it's the marketing team. So what have you got to focus on? You guys have got to bring in this number of leads, but within this CAC range. This is what we're targeting you guys to. But you need to remember the consequences of what you do. We'll always be quality checking this. If these don't flow through the funnel and deliver the lifetime value, we're going to have to come back into it again. So I definitely feel like how we engage from a business partnering point of view it is almost, we do tell a story. Where we do things like quarterly reviews, what we'll often do is we'll start off with, well, as a collective, this is what we believe to be true, and this is what we set out to do. And these were our core assumptions, and this is what we thought was going to happen. This is what actually happened, and it's some of it, yeah, we got right, some of it we got wrong. But what do we learn? What do we learn from it? And therefore, as we move forward collaboratively, what is it we're going to do? What are we going to change? What are we going to focus on? But I think it's really important to, to kind of speak at their level and understand what they're doing. I mean, for me, it's really interesting we have our finance team meeting every week, and we always have a quirky question. The chair rotates and the chair picks the question. And a couple of weeks ago, the question was asked, what's your most memorable career moment? And I kind of thought that's going to be quite a boring question. But actually, do you know what? It was really, really good. Because what was really interesting is most of the team said it was when they got out of the finance department and had to be in the operations. Really good example was one of the team was working in a factory that does smoothies, and the entire assembly line team were out sick, and they had an order to put in, and she had to go down and actually work on the assembly line.
Wow.
And she said, all of a sudden, it all makes sense when you think about, the importance of, the level of fruit that goes into the drink. She says you just all of a sudden have a bit of a eureka moment, in the sense that all of a sudden you understand operations. And I think that's fair. It's kind of the other side of, somebody who's looking at the P&L. They're not going to understand it. Similar to finance people not necessarily understanding what, how the business runs. And, I've seen it myself, at Elder, for example. It's very easy to think about our operating ratios, like, have we got the right number of FTEs per customers, et cetera, et cetera. But until you're actually on the phone and you hear what they do and you see what they have to do and you see the challenges in relation to the documentation that needs to be kept up, it's only then actually all of a sudden you can have a conversation with people from an operational standpoint. So for me, I think it's important to, kind of step into their shoes, appreciate that actually financially, they won't necessarily understand the P&L, but translate it into stuff that makes sense to them. It's this number of leads at this price point. It's this conversion rate with this number of FTEs. And also as well, always kind of build it up with the historics, because I think it's much easier to start a little bit like the earlier example, to say, look, we said we were going to do this in the quarter. These were our 4 assumptions that we said we were going to do. Here's what happened. Let's talk about why it's happened. What have we learned from it? How did we move forward? So, for me, kind of getting that kind of alignment in language and understanding is really, really important.
So, any 3 tips you would like to give our listeners of how to become better at storytelling in a business?
I think for me, it's definitely putting yourself in their shoes and
One,
understanding the challenge that they face. Like if you think about somebody from a marketing perspective, what is it that they understand? How do we explain their role in the business? Because in a lot of cases, you will be having these meetings with people who are only parts of the business equation. It might be the person who's running the sales team or the service team. So put yourself in their shoes and make sure that you have it as an opportunity to educate them. This is why this is important. This is why when you're thinking about your acquisition volume, it's not just about volume. You need to think about quality. And and I think the really important piece as well is building the relationship too, because it's not just a single point in time. What's great at Elder and FP&A at Elder is it feels like we're always being engaged. It's not like a day goes by where somebody doesn't come up and say, I'm thinking about and I'm wondering about and I'm looking at this metric, and it just builds that collaboration and it builds that understanding. And what we do find at Elder is, that interaction between FP&A and the ops of the business is just seamless now, which is really good.
perfect. So basically, walk in their shoes, build that relationship, and anything else?
I think definitely think about the flow. I think the flow is really important. Give context as to exactly what it is we're trying to do, why this is important, why we're focusing on this. Provide data. So ideally kind of show the historics, what's worked well previously, where you've got it right, where you've got it wrong. And then really finish it with, this is a collaboration. We're going to solve this as a
How
collective.
can
I'm
I
not
help?
pointing fingers.
Yeah.
Yes.
How can I help?
Yes, exactly.
No, perfect. That makes sense. So, what's your approach of turning forecast into action plans? Because, like, obviously, there is a whole conversation around, forecasting is dead, thinking budgeting should go away and things like that. But it is not really going away, I don't think, anytime soon. How do you turn that, you know, painful task of making a budget or a forecast to actually something actionable in a business?
I think it always has got to start with the strategy. I think there are times when you get into a budgeting routine that sometimes you forget that you've got to reposition yourself against the business strategy, because the business strategy might change year on year. So, for me, we always start with that. Then we think about those people who are involved in the execution of the strategy. So be it marketing, be it sales, be it service, be it ops. How do they influence it? What are the decisions that they make that's fundamental in relation to the business strategy? So easy one would be marketing. What are we expecting from them from a demand generation point of view to execute on the strategy? Then what you need to do is you need to make sure that the budget is a collaboration. The role of FP&A is very much you explain to these people, right, this is what we're trying to do, and this is your role in it. And this is why your role is important. So we need you, Mr. Marketing Person, to deliver 100,000 leads, and your budget is X. And the reason your budget is X is because, we've done that historically, so we're confident. So that is your role. Then FP&A basically takes all those individual pieces, puts them all together in the pie, make sure that the outputs are aligned with what we expect. Usually there's some adjustment, but then what we do is we then go back to the business, to those leaders, and say, right, as a collective, this is what we're going to do. Are we all happy? Are we all aligned? Are we all agreed that this is the case? But then when you get into execution mode, then that budget is cut into its components. So basically the marketing team who said, look, it's 100,000 leads at this price point. It's right. You guys, 100,000 leads, this price point for this period. And all the reporting then basically builds down into each of those areas. So you should always have a hierarchy. Everything for me is always hierarchical. You need to make sure that everything breaks down into the right components, and then it all rolls up in the right way. So that what happens is Marketing know exactly what they have to do, and they're on it. And then from an execution standpoint, what's key is that operating rhythm. So you're always clear on what's good and are we on track? So for me, a lot of it is around dashboards. They don't have to be complicated, but just within each of those areas, what are my core metrics and am I on or off track? It then feeds into, for us at Elder, it then feeds into, a weekly business performance cycle, but also a monthly cycle. And what we do every month is, because we're dealing with more volatility, because there are more challenges, often we are nudging the budget every month, saying, okay, we were slightly over and under here. We're going to move a few pieces around.
You refocus every month. That's not that unheard of, right? People refocus every month in most businesses.
Yes, well, we will do kind of what I'd call more of a calibration every month, but then every quarter we'll actually do a more formal reforecast. And what we'll do as part of that reforecast is we'll nudge it out another quarter. So for us, when it comes to budgeting, the budget's already done. We've been effectively doing it through the period, and all we're doing is, perhaps, we're taking that time to say, okay, strategically, is there anything else we want to do? We're thinking anything from a product perspective, but it does mean that we're at a point that when it comes to time to do the budget, if anything, all we're doing is we're just kind of nudging it. We're just checking, is there anything kind of slightly off? Is there anything we've missed? But it just, that discipline it just makes such a difference. You're always looking, like for us, we're always looking 18 months ahead, and it just makes our planning so much easier.
Yeah, but see, again, I think two things you mentioned, I think, which in my world from FP&A are very critical. One is, you're not asking for marketing that how much do you want to spend. You're asking them, what are you going to achieve? So you will achieve 100,000 leads for the year at this cost. So you're talking money, which is what is important to finance, but you're talking business metrics or drivers, which are critical for that decision making. And the other piece, I think, which I think is very critical, what you just said, I'm going to summarize that back, is about reporting on dashboards around those then metrics. Most people in businesses I have seen fail to make the connection between reporting and budgeting. They do driver-based budgeting to a certain level, I think very, very minuscule level. They can do better. But then they don't do reporting on those drivers. They're doing reporting on a completely different KPI. And you're like, why? Why? How is that going to help you? That makes no sense. Whereas if you actually do a large chunk of your reporting on the same drivers on which you're doing your forecasting, then you realize in your next forecast cycle at the end of the quarter or end of the month that I got this driver wrong. Either I fix the assumption or I fix the business performance to make sure that we meet the assumption. Like one of the places I was working in supply chain, it was like, either you improve people's productivity by training or better equipment, or you change the assumption in the forecast cycle that people cannot move, 20 boxes in a day. They can move only 15 boxes. And that's fun.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Make up your mind, which one?
I totally agree. I'd have two bills on that. So for me, like if you take marketing as a good example, you're right. It's not a case of just very clearly saying, okay, here's your budget. What we actually do is we'll work with them kind of looking more at the ROI. So often what we'll do on the marketing side is, okay, let's look at your campaigns. How are those campaigns performing? If you look at how much money we're spending there, how are they performing on a click-through basis? Very, very similar to, the example earlier around the online, offline. And like for me, if in a period, all of a sudden marketing come along and say, I need an extra 20 grand, but you know what? This is what we're going to deliver. Happy days. Very, very happy with that. Absolutely. But I totally agree on, kind of looking at the right data sets. I've worked in a number of businesses where I remember there was one interview I went for, and they sent me their management reporting. They sent me their data sets, and they asked me to basically report on in the interview what I felt about business performance. And I literally walked in with a blank sheet of paper, and I said, well, actually, that is exactly what I understand right now. Because you know what you have here? You have an awful lot of numbers, but I have no idea as to whether or not they're good or not. I have no idea, like, is this what we were trying to do? Is this kind of the right conversion metric? Is this on plan? nonsense. Like for me, it goes back to that hierarchy. The business strategy will be driven by probably no more than 6 to 12 kind of core assumptions. And those assumptions are what you're constantly monitoring day to day.
I would come back, sorry, but I have to interrupt you there. 6 to 12 core assumptions. Oh my God, I have seen far too many businesses where they have got 50 KPIs, 100 KPIs, and 200 KPIs. My personal record is I've seen a business with like 20,000, what they call 20,000 and KPIs. Okay. I don't want to name and shame a business, but it's a big telecom giant. Make a big UK based telecom giant. Make of it what you like. But 20,000 KPIs. I would like, please take the K out of the PIs. Okay, because you can't have 20,000 and KPIs that don't go in one sentence. It's either performance indicators or if 20,000. If there are key, they can't be 20,000. Come on, man. Unless you're building rocket parts, you are not doing anything.
No, I think it goes back to, I've seen that before as well. You get businesses where, where I've seen it happen a lot, where all of a sudden they've got really good fancy reporting, and then it just balloons. But you've got to. This is why the hierarchy's got to stay. It's got to go back to what's our strategy, what's our very simple business equation, and usually, like the equation itself has probably got. If I take for us, for example, it's got 3 to 4 components. It's the lead volumes you're bringing in and the quality of those. It's the conversion rate and it's the retention rate. And you might have 1 or 2 kind of below that, but that's it. That's it. You nail those metrics, and then the business works. If you try and overcomplicate it, you just end up with absolute paralysis. So it really has always got to roll back. Like it's fine to have 1,000 PIs, to your point, but if they don't roll up and make sense to those kind of core KPIs, then they're noise, they're distraction. They're probably causing more harm than good.
Oh God, yes. I come because people get space to hide behind different things because they've got just so many that but this is good and that is good. They're just hiding behind different stuff. Whereas that's not the idea. There is 6 or 12 or limited number of KPIs. They are either good or they are bad. Let's not complicate life.
100%.
Okay, so building finance muscle early, right? So when should business start bringing strategic finance leadership and build infrastructure for the strategic finance leadership? What signs do you look for when you think, now is the time to start building some infrastructure and get some strong people in here to run this business?
It's always a lot sooner than you think. Always. For me, I always work on the basis of work back from your fundraising or your exit and actually think about the jobs that have to be done in the lead up to that. So like, let's say you're doing a fundraising, you're probably going to be, kind of 12 months doing your beauty parade. You're probably going to need 12 to 18 months of executing the plan to be ready for the beauty parade. You're probably going to need 12 months to actually understand the business model, execute on it. So like often what it is, it's probably 2 years at least, probably more like 3 years before these events, you should be bringing that muscle in, because it takes time for, somebody to come in as a CFO to build a team, to build the capabilities, to build a plan, and then execute on it. So I always find, people leave it far, far too late. Anytime, what tends to happen based on kind of experience of when I go through recruitment processes is, they basically say, do you know what? I've only got X budget. So I'm going to get an FD in who's going to kind of just get processes and systems in good shape. But then they get to a point where they go, right, okay, right. I need an exit. I need to think about, kind of strategy. I need to think about how to build, profit margins, all this kind of stuff. And they often leave it a little bit too late. But it's a tough call because look, it is a big investment. But anybody who I speak to, I don't think I've ever heard an example of somebody who said, "Oh dear, I invested too early." I genuinely don't think so. I talk to my team about finance being a profit center. A good finance team is a profit center. What does that mean? It is our responsibility to optimize margins, be they profitability margins, be they working capital margins, be they around working capital efficiency. So every year we take a bit of a step back and say, okay, what did we actually deliver? Outside of reporting, what did we actually deliver? And there's a lot of things we can report on. It's in relation to the kind of capital we brought in. It's thinking about the payment processing, working capital cycles, and how we freed up a huge amount of working capital there. It's challenging on certain costs within the business. It's challenging on operational ratios. And we can kind of hold our hands up every year and kind of say, right, we had this as an investment, but actually, you know what? Yeah, we are net positive. And that for me is kind of how people should be thinking.
Yeah, that I think is a lesson of finance leadership. I think we should definitely make a absolute clip out of this one, because I don't think I have heard a lot of finance leaders talk like that, of making yourself accountable in terms of what did we deliver to the business this year, and is it more than our cost of finance as a function, or is it less than that? And if we are, as long as we are value positive, we can justify our existence, and it is our existence beyond statutory reporting. Statutory reporting keeping us out, keeping the business going and keeping us out of prison is a default bread and butter, right? That is not what we should measure. We should measure the value we bring to the business. I think I really love that one. I think that is fantastic. You said 2 to 3 years in advance before you do acquisition or a disposal, for example.
Yes.
Okay. A lot of people will turn around and say, but I can get a CFO for 1 year and he or she will be able to do this for us in 12 to 18 months, right? Have you seen a tangible difference in the business valuation at the time of acquisition or disposal, because the business has started to prepare 3 years in advance rather than 1 year in advance? Does that make sense? Because I do have this hypothesis that if you prepare 3 years in advance, your business valuation will come out better only because you are more organized, you are more profitable, more transparent, more in control of your data, and therefore your business valuation will actually come out better. Is that something you have seen?
Yes, I have. I mean, I've seen it in the example I gave earlier around the business that was looking at online and offline activities. We invested ahead really in relation to that acquisition. And I think the biggest difference is, you have time to prove the model. If you bring someone in, it's very easy for somebody within 12 months to say, I believe I can make 4 or 5 fundamental changes that's going to improve EBITDA margin, customer retention, net revenue, whatever it might be. But you still don't have a track record of execution, and there's a big difference in evaluation between the hope value of you being able to continue to grow profitability or, being much more efficient, as opposed to actually physically delivering it and showing that trajectory. So, if I look at the insurance business, we were definitely ahead of the curve. And what it did mean is the defensibility of any assumptions in our plan were fundamentally different, because actually what we were saying is, this is not an assumption. This is not just a data-led assumption, but this is something that actually we've proven, and we've proven we can continue to deliver it. So I definitely do feel where you have an opportunity for the right profile to come in and actually, not just kind of the processes or the systems or the data structure, but actually impact the economics of the business, which most kind of CFOs should be doing. Having the track record of that, I think, will more than pay for the early investment in getting that skill set in.
Yeah, no, that is it. But I think that is critical. I think people need to hear that instead of leaving it late and getting somebody to come in and study last moment and do the fixing, it is better to make that investment early. That I think is very, very, very critical. I think, sorry, I'm wary of time, so I'm now going to take you to the last 3 compulsory questions, right? So where do you think future of FP&A is in 3 to 5 years? In your case, you're allowed to say AI only because I know you have a story around it.
Yes, I got pre-cleared for that one because I do feel like that's quite important. For years I've had niggles around people talking about their gut instinct. Like, the data says one thing, but their gut instinct says something else. Now, I've always believed that gut instinct is a data point, but it's always really hard to quantify. Now, a live example for us is if we look at our customer base and we're trying to understand why customers leave us, how we have historically done it is, at the time the customer leaves, the person who's in charge of the account basically gives, this is the reason why. And when we looked at that and we tried to understand how could we deliver better service, we didn't see it. We just didn't see it there. Whereas recently, I've brought in AI to actually look at the interactions on the account and basically to pick up, the core messages, the tone, and oh my God, the difference is like genuinely unbelievable. Like, I mean, literally the insight that we've got from that, it's probably one of the biggest changes I've seen personally in relation to years of trying to work with data. We've moved from having a data set that it was very hard for us to take action on, because what was it? It was talking about at that point in time when the customer ceased to be the customer, what was the reason? This is giving us in very concise form a very good summary of the interactions between us and the customer, what's gone well, what's not gone well, things that we can improve on. It's fundamentally changing us from a service point of view. So will AI replace FP&A? Definitely not in the next 3 to 5 years. But can AI hit the next level by leveraging this data? Massively, massively.
I'm going to ask you a question on this one. I'm going to extend this conversation. So this is really interesting. What you are telling me, if I will summarize this back to you, what you just said is when people leave your services, you get a form filled up and that doesn't tell you much because you're like, okay, what do I do with this? Now you've got AI looking at the complete journey of the customer and telling you what went well, what didn't go well, and therefore gives you a better insight into why the customer left. Now, are you able to use AI to map that onto your other customers who are still there, to see that you might lose these customers because they have had these similar bad experiences, and therefore I'm about to lose, and I'm about to therefore predict that these are accounts at risk, go and save them before they leave. Are you able to do that?
That's exactly what we've done. Yeah,
Perfect.
we've overlaid it on that. We've leveraged it as well to build what we call a customer health score. So like literally looking at those scenarios in the existing customer base, traffic lighting them. But this is like a great example would be like we're all about constantly improving. We're very, very conscious that we want to deliver the best service ever. And when we're actually looking at why customers leave, a good example is we do have a lot of customers leave, and the reason is death. Because that's what we do. It's elderly care in the home, and actually, I know this sounds kind of strange, but that's actually probably the best outcome for us, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep them independent in the home, and that's almost kind of our optimal output.
Yeah, but you've given them a good quality of life till they were there, which is the purpose. So it's not
exactly.
It's a good outcome from a perspective of you've given them a good quality of life till the time they had a life, which is the purpose of the business.
Exactly. So for us, but what that meant is, like, if we looked at what could we do differently, we kind of went, no, there was nothing we could have done differently. That's what happened. Sadly, the customers passed away, done. But actually, when you look at the AI and the AI sits across all the interactions, it gives us some really interesting insight to say, oh, do you know what? The customer would have liked a little bit more proactive engagement here, or they would have liked if we did this here, or the care would have liked if we'd done this here. So it just fundamentally changes, our approach from a customer perspective. And as you say, we then overlay this learning in relation to the existing base. All of a sudden, we're on the front foot. We understand trends. I mean, for me, this is I kid you not. This, like, in 8 weeks, this is fundamentally kind of changing how we think and how we support the business in relation to service optimization.
Yeah, this is a story for AI. I will very happily take and make that exception. Because see, this is exciting. Now, when somebody tells me that AI is able to do this, okay, now this, you are applying that on the customer journey. This could be applied on your marketing journey, that, okay, for a B2B sales, for example, of how did I acquire this customer and what is the likelihood of this converting based on all the interactions I have had and things like that. This could be applied to employee retention of when will an employee basically resign based on all the interact. So now this is the AI story which actually resonates because you can apply it to a lot of scenarios. So yes, that I think, and FP&A can leverage it because as a normal FP&A person, you will take the exit form and try to analyze it. But only with AI can you take so many data points, because somebody is with you for 5 years or 6 years if a customer is with you, or 10 years if a customer is with you. That is like a lot of data points. A single human being cannot digest that level of data, but AI can. And that,
Yes,
I think,
100%.
is
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay. So what is one thing that is most FP&A functions need help with today, and to help them become a better strategic finance business partner? What do you think most FP&A functions need help with today to become a better strategic finance business partner?
I think for me, it's their positioning in the business. I think, there's a generic challenge around having the right data set, having the right tools, having the right skills. But for me, the businesses where FP&A has been successful, it's where FP&A is front and center. And that is a CFO that is minded of the importance of FP&A in that function, the importance of business partnering, the importance of data-led decision making, very much aligned to the CEO's mindset too. So for me, that's probably the biggest one. I think there's a lot of scenarios where you can talk about, like you gave a great example around, businesses where you've got, 200 kind of Google Sheets and you're trying to pull it all together. But I think the difference is if you have somebody who genuinely believes in the strategic importance of FP&A, they'll solve those problems. They'll get the budget, they'll invest in the systems, but it's got to be like FP&A has got to be seen as being strategically important at the C-suite level.
Sure. And if somebody is looking to get into FP&A, or somebody is just starting with FP&A, what are the skills they should be looking at, and what are the certifications they should be looking at to be successful at FP&A according to you?
I think, definitely, a good finance qualification is important. I think SEMA is quite a good one, because I think at the end of the day, you still need to be able to converse financially. That's just incredibly important. Skills, I would say, be curious, to be quite honest. Be curious. What got me into FP&A was I was curious. I wanted to understand why the business was doing A as opposed to B, why the results were looking this way. And really be nosy and get into the weeds and bring the insight out. Be the person who kind of has a conversation with the ops director and says, "Oh, by the way, this is interesting. Are you aware of this?" And for me, that's it. We've had some, like, one of the success stories I think we've had at Elder is, we've had a guy who was in the account exec team on service, and he was curious. He was kind of going, "Well, this is interesting. Why? And we actually brought him into the FP&A team, and he progressed really, really well. I mean, he was incredibly valuable, because all of a sudden you had somebody who, he started operationally. He then did his CMAs, but he had that operational mindset and really thinking about retention, really thinking about lifetime value. So that bit is the most important. I think that curiosity, that desire to kind of go a little bit deeper and translate kind of what's happening from a business operations point of view and translate that into P&L. That's really key.
Yeah. So don't be shy. Ask the question, and don't be afraid to ask the question. Yeah, that is
Exactly. And don't be afraid to shout with what you see. It's definitely, it's well worth stick your neck out and get noticed.
Yeah, but that is actually a very good advice. I can completely resonate with that as well over my career. I completely agree with that one. Cool. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks a lot. I think it was a wonderful session. Some very good stories on AI, some very good stories on how FP&A can actually drive decision making in a business. I am sure our audience will love these stories, man. I think it is really, really good. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. And we look forward to actually having you again sometime.
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks for the invite. Really, really enjoyed it. Always passionate to talk about this stuff.
No, thank you so much. Cheers.